welcome once again to the Planning Commission. It is Thursday, January 19th. Hard to believe we're already halfway through January. It is a little after 12 o'clock. Looking up and down the dais, we do have a quorum minus one commissioner. And I don't think anybody who's going to speak before us. No, okay. So we have the disposition of the December 1 meeting minutes.
And I've had a chance to look at them before the meeting, and I will move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Okay. Do I have a second? You have a second. Any further discussion on the December 1st, 2022 minutes? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. All right. Those have been adopted. Our second order of business is election of the 2023 Planning Commission Chair and Vice Chair. I propose putting in a slate of myself continuing on for 2023 as the chair and John Katowski as the vice chair.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed, same sign. All right, thank you, John. Cases, we have none.
Thank you.
Communications, we do. Last week, we were sitting there looking, what do we have on our agenda, knowing that we didn't have anything in terms of communications for projects in the city or development. And therefore, having looked through the 2040 comprehensive plan, or visioning, knowing that there's one of the things that needs to come through the Planning Commission, if this commission so chooses to pick it up, is looking at the zoning changes that were recommended by communities that are surrounding gateways into the city, as well as our neighborhoods, the different neighborhoods within the city itself. And so I know that Director Stone, you and I both identified some areas that I felt like we should start that conversation going. There was some areas within the west side neighborhood, as well as the Stimson Avenue corridor, and we can actually, address any others that we may come across. So I don't know if you want to start touching on these.
Thank you. So I did send out a little bit of information in advance of the meeting to the members, just to kind of focus people's attention on the different parts of the comprehensive plan that talk about zoning changes in these two areas that you mentioned, Stimson and the west side. This plan was written prior to the Stimson Avenue corridor improvements project. So, since the plan was written, we did improvements that actually were in line with this plan to increase kind of the streetscape there, decorative lighting, a widened sidewalk on the one side to be able to support bike and pedestrians on the one side of the street. And then also a lot of stuff under the ground. So water, sewer, storm upgrades, fiber optic conduit to be available for future use. And so, we really made a lot of the gains on that Stimson Avenue corridor. And now we're really talking about how can we promote economic development and redevelopment in the Stimson Avenue corridor. We have a technical assistance grant through Jobs Ohio, specifically Ohio Southeast, using a company called American Structure Point to help us do some economic development planning along the Stimson Avenue corridor and looking at what parcels are ripe for redevelopment, what they should be zoned in order to support that redevelopment, given the goals in our plan, any incentives or tools that the city could use to promote that redevelopment in that area, to include TIFs as one mechanism, and then perhaps any other mechanisms. And so there's actually a series of stakeholder meetings that are going to happen here in the next couple weeks, driven by the EDC and the consultant from American Structure Point, where we're gonna meet with, local business owners, property owners, realtors who have to market the area.
Neighborhood associations, I hope?
Yeah, neighborhood associations for sure. To talk about what Stimson Avenue could and should look like, and how we could promote economic redevelopment along the Stimson Avenue corridor. Our comprehensive plan in Stimson, before we jump into the west side, talks about, and specifically on page 68 in the comprehensive plan, changing the zoning to B2D or something similar that would reduce the need for more surface parking and encourage pedestrian scale design. And really what we're talking about there is the P2D concept allows for business parking, requirements in the bulk controls not to be met for businesses that go into a particular area. That's what we do in the uptown area, where we say B2D. That parking is served by the parking garage, so if you go and put in a new business in an area, you don't have to, meet the minimum number of parking spaces for the type of business. Now, it doesn't apply to residential. I think that's also something that we can talk about when we look at Stimson Avenue. Most specifically, you look at the large surface parking lot that was required for Palmer Place when it went in at the corner of Stimson and East State, and even at the height of the school year, that lot sits about half full. So is it necessary to have that amount of parking for the residential in the particular area? So I think that, in our goals to increase density in our near-in neighborhoods and devote less valuable land to surface parking, I think looking at zoning in that area is something we should do.
So let me read this. This is, again, page 68 of the comprehensive plan, and it's the Stimson Avenue corridor, and it says basically moving forward. And there was a lot of community input that went into certainly the neighborhoods themselves, but they had the opportunity as well to speak on our corridors. So in the moving forward section of this, it said this plan recommends a change in zoning. The south side of Stimson from Campbell to the roundabout should be rezoned B2D or similar designation. Such a location could provide neighborhood level amenities such as convenient shopping or restaurants to the residents in the surrounding area. And it continues to go on speaking to both the south side and the north side. Just as a reminder, B2D, if I'm not mistaken, as you just referenced, the parking, but also height restrictions are different when you're looking at B2D versus, say, B3, where B2D can go up 4 stories. A B3 is 3.5 stories, and that is referenced in here as well as you read further through this document. But again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit within that moving forward. It states that this plan recommends exploring changes to the intersection of Carpenter, Stimson, East State Street in order to increase pedestrian safety and ease of use. This plan also recommends changing the zoning to B2D or something similar that would reduce the need for more surface parking and encourage pedestrian scale design, as you just indicated, Andy. So, and then it also speaks to, on page 75, Carpenter. As we all know, once you cross over East State Street, then that roadway continues on as Carpenter Street. Do you want to speak at all to that, Andy?
Well, as I think we've briefed the commission, we're very close to having the funding in place, assuming success with the Appalachian Communities Grant, that we feel confident in our application for redevelopment of the Armory into a share work, co-work facility that is also available for events. And so, as we look at Carpenter Street specifically, I think there are some recommended changes in here. I have to find it here in the plan. The single-family rental parcels on Carpenter, plan recommends changing the zoning of the single-family rental parcels on Carpenter to permit townhouse-style development. This location could be ideal for a new market rate senior housing or non-student housing for people or who want to live near uptown campus in public transportation. So, really what we're talking about is the area from East State Street really through probably the Armory and you know, when I look at the zoning map, I'd have to jump over and look at it. I think there's some R1 that sits kind of right along there, and
Some are three too, right?
yeah, there's definitely R3, but I think there's some R1 on the one side that probably is not the most appropriate zoning, given how close it is to the uptown area. None of them are single-family homes that are occupied by owner-occupied anyway. And so allowing for some townhouse-style construction, you know, along that northern side of Carpenter might make sense, given how dense it is.
It might worth as well looking, to look at extending it up to Congress, where Mount Zion Church is located, you know, because there are some, I think those homes that sit there between the Masonic Temple Lodge and Mount Zion Church, that those are, I know that they're rental units right now, former single-family homes that are rentals, and on the other side of the street as well.
Right.
Okay,
The Masonic Lodge does have a huge parking lot.
it does now.
So one of the things that jumps out at me is that often I would like to shop in the downtown area or the uptown area, Court Street essentially, and things. And because of the difficulty in finding parking, sometimes I just don't even bother trying to do that, you know, and what what I'm thinking is, I want to make sure that as we make it more dense, that we don't necessarily push out desirable businesses for people other than students. I mean, I know that it's always going to be heavily utilized by students, you know, I mean, there's a lot of student housing there, and you know, we need to meet the needs of those students. But on the other hand, I still think that I would like to see businesses there that go beyond things that are just focused on students, you know, and so, I mean, I don't know how that fits into that overall concept, but I think that's important, in my mind it is anyway, to be more diverse in the uptown area and not necessarily find it to just turn it, you know, over to students or stuff, and then, you know, maybe other people are there during the lunch hour because they work there with the students. But anyway, that's just a thought. I want to spend a little more time thinking about that. Not that what's being proposed I don't necessarily agree with. I do think we need to look at that, but I want to make sure that we're real thoughtful about, you know, what does this mean to the types of businesses that can survive and live there.
So I'd like to start by saying that we had a corridor group with the previous mayor, actually. And I had Columbus Road, so I'm not sure I'm really up to speed on this. But I do think that a lot of the things went back to even that period. Paul was with us at that point, and he encouraged us to go ahead. But I'm a little bit worried. Here comes the hard part. I'm a little bit worried about intensification of land use in a sporadic way. I had my students often do a study of what would happen if they worked on that area. And on the south part of this area, not Carpenter, but whatever it is, South Stimson. And it seemed to me that there was quite a bit of interest in the next street on what would happen if that went on, because there'd be an intensification of land use, and there would be fewer cars able to park there, probably, almost certainly. And I wonder if that's what, that intensification may have an impact on the next neighborhood. I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but it's pretty studified right now, isn't it?
You specific,
Paul?
I'm sorry,
No, it's not Paul, what's his name, Dave?
Rob.
Rob, well, I'll get it, yeah. Okay, you know it better than I do, but isn't Morris Avenue heavily studentified? You're the expert witness.
So I'm
today.
Rob Delac, I live at 124 Morris Avenue. I'd say Morris Ave itself is probably a third or so student housing. So there's a little bit. It's
Or
not,
houses that have been
or
converted?
or other types of rental housing, rental properties. Maybe a little more than a third, somewhere in that range. It's still predominantly single-family homes and accessory dwelling units and things like that. I think the kind of proposal you're talking about, a B2D for Stimson with a slightly lowered height requirement for the north side of the street, would be acceptable, I think, and it wouldn't have a severe impact on the neighborhood. One thing that already is a fantastic benefit for the neighborhood, we have about 800 homes in the neighborhood there. It's walking distance to go to Stimson, so none of us have to drive. I walk all the time to go to the pharmacy, the post office, the Busy Day, the liquor store there. The bike shop when it was there, and hopefully there'll be something replacing that. There was a proposal for something and it hasn't happened yet, but Chinese restaurants there. So there's a number of, and more is coming in, like Jackie O's Bake Shop is now on the street there too. So there's a lot of great things already happening there, but some redevelopment to I think further densify businesses and housing there I think would be beneficial for the neighborhood actually. And maybe take some of that pressure off the student housing, and maybe there's been a couple houses on Morris that have been converted from student housing to single-family rental, so completely remodeled, and now there are family, living in that building. So more of that could happen too if this pressure is taken off of the housing on Morris, and there's new housing on Stimson, for example. Yeah. So I think this is. What I've heard already is for Stimson is a great proposal and would really improve and enhance what the possibilities are there.
Thanks. I think.
As far as parking requirements, like I said, the neighborhood, I don't think the neighborhood, some people will still want to probably drive down there, but it is walkable easily from the entire neighborhood. And that's a lot of customers right there. Plus the student housing, all walkable to get there too. The student, Mill Street, whole Mill Street area is walkable to there too.
Well,
so
what I heard before was that the people who were parking there to go, enjoying the walkability, were going to OU. And so there was a request, an active one, to zone it for 24-hour parking or even less.
I don't know if I'd encourage more 24-hour parking. It's a bit onerous, but.
Oh, I know. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, but I do appreciate what you're.
But metering the spaces that are on Stimson might make sense. Those are not metered now.
Yep.
There's not a lot of them, and it was nice that the street could be designed to include bicycle and pedestrian access on the sidewalk,
You can thank.
shared use path area, and keep some of the parking, because the original proposal was a bike lane that would have really taken up the parking possibilities on the street, would have had almost no parking. So that's nice. There's some parking on Palmer that's public parking as well, should be improved, I think. In fact, the Disabilities Commission just talked last night about trying to make a better handicapped accessible spot there, right near the corner. So there is some parking there. Businesses, I will say, are usually pretty smart about how they approach parking, and they don't want to pay more for parking, get more parking than they need. And the parking requirements in the city have been reduced, and the B2D would help reduce at least the first ground level retail parking requirements. So I think let the businesses decide what they need as far as parking, who their customers are, and if they need to work with and have some parking nearby available that they lease or that they own, that should be their decision, I think, and let them make those decisions. They're the business people. They should know what they're doing, and let them decide what those requirements should be. My 2 cents worth, more than 2 cents. Anything else from me?
No, not right now.
I was just going to say, I'm glad you had mentioned, Mr. Dulac, that parking that's on Palmer, that is city parking right up against the Procost building across from the Hocking Valley Bank. I know that there have been concerns from the Commission on Disabilities when it comes to the 88 parking spaces that exist on Stimson Avenue, but the challenge becomes the angle, and that it was just part of how that had to be designed because of the tight space in which to build the wider sidewalks and whatnot. But there is a curb cut right next to the restaurant down the street from Busy Day Market, across the street from Hockenbilly Bank. And so it's something that I think we could certainly look at, is putting the ADA parking over next to the Procost building, you know, which then they can just access the curb cuts and cross over to the other side of the street, as opposed to trying to figure out how to maneuver in those parking spaces. So,
A tool that,
Can I just add something to that?
yes, you can.
So, you know, the commission just discussed this very issue last night, and they are building a project list to try and track the things that they would like to see addressed, and this is the first one on the list. So they definitely like to discuss it and continue. They've talked to the engineers a couple times about it, but there's not been any status updates, or they don't know what's happening, or if somebody's even thinking about it still, so FYI.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, when it was brought to my attention, we were rolling out of curb painting season, to where we're talking about putting down blue paint, you know, and clearly designating as well as putting up an ADA parking sign along there. So it's something that we can get to work on.
sir, one of the notes related to metered spaces versus unmetered spaces. So just a little history in this area is we used to have metered spaces on Stimson, and they were pretty severely underutilized. And so we pulled those meters and went to 2-hour spaces. We kept 2-hour spaces after the Stimson project. If there was an intensification, there's nothing to say that we couldn't go back to metered spaces along Stimson Avenue if it would help turn cars to support access to businesses, because that's something I think that you know, we've really been very deliberate about doing is you know, not only adjusting our location of parking spaces, metered spaces, but adjusting the rates based on demand and intensification of use of where we want to have. So like if, for instance, the northern end of Court Street, which currently is lower rates because it's not as intensively used, if it starts to become more intensively used, we can kind of tweak those parking rates in order to keep those spaces turning over and supporting you know, business access for metered parking spaces versus 2-hour unmetered spaces, which is what is on Stimson right now.
On the side of the building, right, that's,
Well, I mean, in public right of way, and yeah, so.
there's not much in the public right of way, is there?
There's not on Stimson, there's some.
You'd have to knock out the curbs and go in.
Yeah, and again, that was kind of the trade-off, right, of
I agree with
putting a
that.
little bit on the street versus a little bit, you know, sidewalks and street furniture and such, but yeah, on the
And
sides, we can,
planters.
yeah, we can do more metered spaces down there, if we needed to, in conjunction with an intensification that would happen.
But it would be a while. I was also wondering about the B2D and the first floor requirement for business, because I was concerned about the one that I voted against on Carpenter and Grosvenor. And I think it's turned into some kind of vaping place now. But it was, I mean, not a great idea for, I'm not opposed to it or in favor of it, but I think that maybe we should, as you're talking about it, reconsider the requirement for a first floor business at some locations. I don't know, every time I go down to Grosvenor, I go, oh geez, we shouldn't have done that, or they shouldn't have done that.
I
Just,
understand.
it does, you know, it's not that there's that much stuff going on downtown. Sorry, John, but there isn't. I mean, I just wonder sometimes, you could turn that into another rental. But that would be heresy.
Is it the choice of business that went in? Is that what?
No, I just hated seeing it empty.
Yeah.
That was what I hated all along for years.
You know, I would be opposed to modifications that change any of our zoning that currently has a requirement for first floor business, to get away from that. And the reason is as the person responsible for, you know, running the operations of the city that's so reliant on income tax, You know, the more we remove locations that businesses are in that hire people to pay income tax, the less revenue that the city makes to be able to pay firefighters and police officers. So, you know, while I'm supportive of housing, because we need to have people to exist, I think in our limited areas where there are places that are zoned specifically for business, you know, we should try to avoid creating
First floor
conditions
business?
for first floor businesses. I think about like some of the other, you know, communities in, you know, Appalachian Ohio that had vibrant downtowns at one point because of, you know, demographic shifts and economic shifts. You know, they got away from it, and then, you know, they got a bunch of apartment fronts in a business zone otherwise, which I think is problematic.
But they do pay taxes on the rental income.
Supposedly.
Well, I don't think that's a supposedly. I think we better get Kathy on here.
Okay.
All right, so.
So, and we're really just talking about very little, from what I've heard thus far of our discussion, very little conversion of residential space to business space. We're not talking about growing the business component very much. We're talking about making some adjustments to the business components, going to R2D, B2D, but it's already B, I think.
It's B3
in most
on
cases,
Simpson.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's just that B zone, that B3 zone has parking requirements tied to
Okay.
that first floor business.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that we've heard as we've talked to a couple developers about Stimson Avenue is unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to say it, is the rental residential units on Stimson Avenue are nice, you know, and are well kept. And because they're nice and well kept, their property value is more. And so getting a developer to make the numbers work,
Yeah.
to be willing to buy it and then subsequently
The
make it
very
more
narrow
expensive.
lots
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
extremely narrow.
So you gotta buy a
Much
couple of lots
You
to do
get-
something.
yeah.
You have to have 3 or 4
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not too excited about the senior housing, even though I'm a senior downtown. I think it's not necessarily a good idea. Because I think they'll do better on a different area where there isn't so much congestion and so on. But who am I to judge? I'm not gonna move into it anyway. Okay, at least as far as I know.
Okay.
That's what it was saying.
Well, that's the Stimson Avenue / Carpenter corridor. The other area that we were going to at least just start the conversation on is the west side. And if I may, there's 2 components to this with the west side that we've identified. One of them is on page 26 within our economic development, entrepreneurship, and tech area of the comprehensive plan. So this is more looking at West Union. So item number 1 on page 26 speaks to expanding B2D zoning along the north side of Union to the West Union Street Office Center, which is Woosok, Ohio University's property. Item number 2, to change B2D style zoning, change to B2D style zoning near the Schaefer, Union, and Schaefer, Washington intersections. I want to kind of, at this point, let's target the Schaefer and Washington as well as the Schaefer and West State Street, which does come up as well. I don't know if it's in this section necessarily, with State Street, but that's the intersection that has Stuart McDonald on it. Washington Street is the one that has the Cider House. I think you could also include the West Side Distillery, which is kind of behind there. Miller's Chicken is within that footprint. There are former business frontages that are along Washington Street that have since been turned into just complete rental units. But I think that's part of this conversation as we look forward. So there's really, this is kind of economic development if you think about it. We already have a DRD that is, it's called 234 Washington Street Downtown Redevelopment District, which does include the intersection of State, no it doesn't, it includes the intersection of Washington and Schaefer. But again, as we're looking at ways to improve the city, and in a lot of ways, I think historically, that area of Schaefer was kind of the hub for the west side for amenities to where it became walkable, to where people could get some of the things they need. I know that there was a lawnmower repair shop that was down there. I think part of this too, on the west side, it looks at rezoning the former Frank's Bait Shop location on Second and Central Avenue to B1, which would allow for neighborhood commercial use to return to that site. And then it speaks to rezoning parcels near Ohio University's Innovation Center to R3. Director Stone, remind me that that is actually zoned M, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, there's several parcels that are west of the Innovation Center on the south side of State Street in that area that are currently housing. You know, they're either single-family homes, or I think there might still actually be some modulars that are in that location, but it's currently zoned to M. And, you know, right now, if they were to go vacant for more than a year, you know, we could not permit a new rental permit for any of those properties, because M zone doesn't allow for residential at all. And, you know, we're always protective of our M zones because there's not much of it, but, you know, that is a location where it probably doesn't make a lot of sense.
Did I miss anything?
So the one other note that I would kind of bring up as we're thinking about this particular area is, you know, with the new Russ Opportunity Center, the area to the you know, the former HDL and the rail yard and parking lot to the west of there, you've got the Ohio Lottery building, and then you've got a fairly large parking lot that is underutilized, that actually has frontage on Schaefer Street, right there, kind of the intersection
But
of
no
Byard.
access.
Well, it could be access if
But
they
I mean,
wanted it.
right now it's shut off.
It's shut off right now, but it could have access if needed, and that is an area that could get redeveloped depending on how we zone it. I think right now it's zoned R3, if I'm not mistaken. I have to go back and take a quick look at that. But you know, there's been a couple of proposals in the past for that little section there that kind of sits down below Byard, you know, as to how that could get redeveloped, but we've not seen anything recently.
There's nothing there that I'm opposed to, I guess, at all. I mean-
So, I have a question, my question is, that area in front of the fairgrounds, is it rented out by the parcel or by the area? Fairgrounds, you know, the parking area, it says only you over the parking.
That's what the fairgrounds.
So
that's
they
their-
pay us or them? I
It's
don't
an
know.
arrangement directly with the fair board. I don't know what their.
Okay, I just wondered about that. It's in the floodplain anyway. I have to redo the fairgrounds too.
So what are the next steps here?
The next steps would be really to hone in on what are the boundaries of what we're talking about with the rezoning when we're talking B2D. For Stimson Avenue, do we just target Campbell to the roundabout, or do we look at, say, Palmer to the roundabout? Do we look even further and think East State Street to the roundabout on the south side? But, you know, in the comprehensive plan, it just speaks to Campbell to the roundabout. But I would contend that there is some potential opportunity to think a little bit larger, or at least for us to have that conversation. So to provide boundary options, and do the same with the west side as well as the economic development component within the comprehensive plan that includes West Union as well as Schaefer.
And as a commission, ultimately, would we have a public hearing on this?
I think we would.
before, and then ultimately send it to council? Is that the way
Right.
this would work?
We'd have I'm sorry, sir. But we'd have a public hearing, where we discuss the zoning changes, and then we would vote on, zoning change recommendation, and that would go before city council for them to act on.
Okay.
And that, as a, zoning changes can come from a couple different directions, and one of them is initiated.
Owners?
Yeah, owners can, that's one way, council themselves can, and then the planning commission can, and there's a process in the code, for each of those, and in this particular instance, it's the planning commission taking input from the comprehensive plan and then making a recommendation based on that on specifics. And so I would recommend that we try to get the American Structure Point Economic Development Plan for Stimson Avenue that we're paying for, or the city's not paying for, but Jobs Ohio is paying for, to provide us that map basically, and then we as a planning commission tweak it and then put forward the recommendation for council, at least in the Stimson portion.
Absolutely.
Well, so I would recommend that, you have spent time looking at this and thinking about this, and I would recommend that we put together, the area we put together is as large as you think it should be. If it's beyond what the comprehensive plan says, that's okay. I think we should do that. And then we can always tweak it back. But from my perspective is that it would be a terrible thing if we made it too small and later found we wanted to make it larger. But again, we could tweak it back if if the public input comes and we feel strong, the public feels strongly that the planning commission is considering too much, then I think we could always tweak it and make it smaller.
Yeah, I agree. So I think as the structure point conversation begins and start going through that process for the Stimson Avenue corridor, that once that's finalized, that we can bring forward to us again, and then we sit there and make a determination on that. And as Director Stone was saying, then it goes forward to council, and council can take it up. I just feel strongly, and then for the west side, Andy and I can get together and figure out what makes the most sense, and recognizing that there's actually 3 downtown redevelopment districts that are kind of in that area, and figure out, okay, what's makes the most sense for what the boundaries of B2D looks like in that area. We will talk about Frank's Bait Shop, and the zoning for that. That one, we certainly would like to have neighborhood input on, because that is in the heart of that neighborhood.
What about the West Elementary School property?
Well, again, the plan, as I understand it, is to have the building demoed, return to green space that is practice fields for
Middle
the
school?
middle school.
Okay. What's that zoned right now?
Excuse me one second.
Sure.
I'll tell you.
My kids like it.
R1.
R1? Okay.
Yeah, it's under R1.
And most of that Central Avenue is R1 then?
It is.
Okay, it all is, okay.
So just before we go into this, I was wondering if I can be a contrarian as usual. I would like to know why B2D, other than the fact that it exists, would be desirable for this area.
The west side?
Both of them, all
Okay,
of them.
all
I
of
think B2D is, it's kind of a manufacturer thing, but couldn't we not we, but couldn't the planners that you're hiring do a better job of sort of looking at our downtown and saying this is not necessarily the very best one?
That's a great point, Nancy, and I think one of the statements in the comprehensive plan is B2D or similar style zoning.
I know, we skipped that though, didn't we?
Well, something we could do, just because we all kind of know what B2D is, but something we could do is we could do a zoning overlay that's specific to this area, that has its own special characteristics. An example for a zoning overlay is the source water protection area. That's one that's overlaid on a particular area. It goes over several different zones, and it modifies, what can and can't be done. In that particular case, it's more restrictive. We could create a zoning overlay that's less restrictive than the underlying zoning, and that could be a recommendation that we move forward as well.
So to continue my contrarian mode, I mean, what incentives would they have to go with this unless there is a real advantage economically? Look down on the end of Stimson, for example. We're gonna have a lot of traffic in there anyway, aren't we? If we start doing buying and selling as well as sleeping and partying and studying.
I'm glad you threw in studying, Nancy.
Well, the students I know would move into the Cartland. But anyway, I guess I don't understand how B2D will lead to this down there. Maybe up the hill it will. I don't understand. Although one person owns almost all of it, doesn't that one person?
He does.
Is he interested? He's old.
He is, and actually, that was one of the discussions that we were talking about earlier, that when we had introduced him to a couple of developers, and they said, hey, the trouble is you kept your property in too good a shape, so it's worth too much. If it was all run down, you could buy it at a cheaper amount, and then they could get redeveloped and make the numbers work. But in the existing conditions, because he's been such a good property owner and kept it in such
He
good
wouldn't be
repair.
anything less.
Yeah.
He would have maintained it. Oh, boy. So what incentive is it to his kids to sell it then, next time, or his wife? I mean, if it goes all at once, it will work perfectly. If it doesn't go all at once, it won't.
In my discussions with him, he intends to sell it all at once, basically, to a developer when the price is right, basically.
Well, that would be good.
Right.
Well, and just as a reminder to everyone that this part of Stimson Avenue, actually all of Stimson Avenue, is in an opportunity zone. So there's some advantages there when it comes to development, but as Andy indicated, that the homes along there that are owned by a single person, by a single entity, have maintained them very well. So I think.
Shouldn't criticize people for doing that.
No.
I agree.
It's not being
Yeah,
critical at
no,
all.
not at all.
No, okay.
That's not where I'm coming from.
Okay. It's hard.
All right, well, structure point, and Andy and I will get to work, because we're looking at this. I think, Councilmember McCary, I know that he really pays attention to the comprehensive plan, as we all should. And I think we do, by and large, but, to see things that are achievable, things that we can sit there and begin to really address when it comes to the comprehensive plan, I think that it behooves this body to sit there and really look at this and say, okay, what should we be taking on? I feel strongly that the zoning is kind of our beachhead as we move forward and make some positive change here in the city of Athens.
So I do have one other item on this.
Okay.
I think it's relevant to this discussion, even though it's not in these two areas. I've been a member of the Ridges Advisory Board for a number of years, just by virtue of the position that I'm in, and Ohio University is getting much closer to moving forward with this endeavor called the New Community Authority, NCA, and creating NCA, and that's not just the university, that's the city of Athens as well as Athens County all have to be in favor to create this New Community Authority. But I don't have the exact dates, but in the next few months there are going to be at least 2 public meetings talking about that, and I think that this body basically probably should be one of the receiving entities on one of the presentations, so that number one, we can get it on television, and number two, since any zoning changes, which right now it's all zone DI, and obviously, there'll have to be zoning changes for redevelopment on that.
Yeah, there's another one you could probably modified.
Right, right, and one, and
Useless and hopeless.
we'll definitely have to
It
for,
didn't lead to anything.
for the new community authority and the plans.
Okay.
At the ridges.
So who's the principal at OU that's in charge? Is it Shauna?
Yeah, you know, for all intents and purposes, between Shauna and Dom, those are the two, folks.
Who's
in-
Dom?
Dominic Brooks.
Brooke, yeah.
Yep. Dominic Brooks.
But ultimately, the board of trustees will have to, you know, agree to
But
it.
they'll, that's what they do.
All right, thank you, sir. I know that we have David Riggs, Director of Development and Code Enforcement. I'm not gonna put you on the spot, because I don't, unless you have anything burning that you wanna share with this body, I didn't think so. But David, thanks for being here and at least listening in. Opportunities for citizens to speak on items not covered by the agenda, or on the agenda. Mr. Dulac, anything? Oh, good. Glad you liked it. Our next announcements and other business, our next meeting is going to be on Groundhog's Day. And let's just hope that that meeting doesn't happen again and again and again. But we will be meeting here in council chambers on the 2nd of February. Unless there's any other announcements or business for the commission, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.